Hello everyone, welcome back to the H.V.M.N Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Latt Mansor, a PhD in Physiology, Anatomy and Genetics, and the research lead of Health via Modern Nutrition. And if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a review, and if you have any question, leave us a comment, and as always, we appreciate it if you can share it with a friend. Now, without further ado, let's get into this episode of H.V.M.N Podcast. I have Mollie Eastman on Health via Modern Nutrition Podcast. Welcome to our podcast. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Such a fan. I know we were having a blast before we even hit record, so I know we're going to have a very fun conversation.
Yeah, we couldn't stop talking for like a good 15 minutes before this. Right? So we're just talking about how we both had our respective shots of Ketone-IQ right before we got on, because, you know, it takes about 15-20 minutes for it to work.
Exactly.
And now it's the exact time where our brains are wired. We're ready to talk science. We're ready to talk about sleep and everything about, you know, Mollie, it's about sleep optimization, sleeping as a skill. So why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners what your background is and your story?
Oh, absolutely. And yes, the ketones are hitting, and very excited to have this conversation. I know we've got such alignment in many, many areas, so this is going to be very fun. So a little background, essentially my journey is one of really scratching my own itch, solving my own problem. What that looked like was kind of a 3-part series relationship to sleep. And how that evolved was when, for a long time, just a lot of fixed narratives in how I thought of myself as a sleeper, which was, you know, I'm a short sleeper, I'm a night owl, it's in my genes, I'll sleep when I'm dead, a lot of narratives and labels, and a lot of surviving, or a perception that it was just a matter of surviving how it was for me. And some of my habits got more and more pronounced as time went on and throughout college. I have a background in psychology and behavioral change out of Syracuse, and living in very gray and snowy environment up in upstate New York, and just did all the things not to do for sleep. The opposite of what we're going to talk about today. That's how I lived my life for a very long time. And just got more and more pronounced. And then flash forward as a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, what that started to look like was I would be going to bed as the sun was rising, but I would be justified and righteous the whole time. And I would say, well, I make my own hours. What's the big deal? Who cares? And I wouldn't then connect the dots with a series of things that were kind of beginning to unravel for me with my health and well-being. So what that looked like was the beginnings of an ulcer. I got shingles in my 20s, you know, all these signs that probably how I was managing things wasn't exactly working, including just a heightening as well as anxiety, a lot of ups and downs, and relating to myself as, well, I guess this is me. This is part of my personality. And it wasn't until I went through what ended up being really one of the lowest moments of my life, which was kind of hitting rock bottom, really, really struggling in this world of entrepreneurship, ups and downs and stressors and responsibilities and employees and all of it. And my now husband and I, we've been together 12 years, and we went we decided to almost do this Tim Ferriss type lifestyle. We put everything in storage, went, you know, to one-way ticket to become digital nomads and take our businesses on the road without the foundation to really allow for that. And so that ended up just like spiraling. And so where did
you go?
We first landed in Madrid, and that first night, I'd never really traveled much. I grew up with, like, you know, not a lot of money, and I never really traveled, never really experienced jet lag. And that jet lag on top of a very anxious state, lots of stressors, a nervous system that was really not working, not working, but trending in a sympathetic dominant state. When I landed in Madrid, then I had, in the middle of the night, a panic attack. I'm like, what am I doing? You know, I'm backpack and carry on. I have all these responsibilities. How am I going to handle all this? And then from that place, it kind of just kept going, where this experience of like, I get a couple hours of sleep, barely have that sensation of a new day, the division of, okay, I fall asleep and now we're starting a new day. It would barely be there. And so I felt like I'm losing my mind. This is really awful. And is it always going to be like this? Like, it really began to be this existential crisis of, am I going to have to take, sleeping pills for the rest of my life? Am I going to be walking down this path of pharmaceuticals and the whole world of it? So what that ended up looking like was at one of my lowest points in Croatia, going to the doctors with Google Translate and saying, help, I can't sleep, and then leaving with their version of Ambien and realizing, all right, if I am going to take on this area, it's really, I'm going to need to step into having that level of responsibility to really take this on, and dive in. And so in that diving in, what I discovered completely changed my life, which was this whole world of chronobiology, the science of time and how time impacts your biology, understanding this concept of circadian rhythm entrainment, which later ends up, being a big piece of what we do with Sleep as a Skill. But really what that came out of was out of this place of fear and what felt like shame and embarrassment of not being able to do something so basic as sleep and primal, and really almost wanting, like, why don't we have some sort of, AA for sleep or somewhere to go where we can have a support network to work through these challenging areas of our lives and challenging times. And so what then got created on the other side of that was Sleep as a Skill, and really taking the stance that, like any great skill, we can start at the beginning, wherever we're at, wherever the beginning is for any of us, and then begin to learn what it takes to optimize this area, which I make the argument in our modern society, most of us are so far off of the bell curve of what had been normal for thousands of years, of that workability between these rhythms of nature. So now on the other side of that, now we are in hotels. We work with, we have a particular niche in poker as well as UFC. We work with different athletic teams. We work with high performers and corporations, as well as just individual people looking to improve and optimize their sleep. And we really have that at this intersection of technology, accountability, behavioral change. Every person we work with is at least wearing a wearable tracker. As of right now in 2023, we have everyone wearing the Oura Ring, often with other pieces of tech to get some objective data about where they're at with their sleep, as to marry with that subjective data. So out of that, I share that because on the other side of it, I never thought that this could be possible for me, because for so long I just thought that I was doomed and destined to have this kind of poor relationship with my sleep. So I share that so that wherever the listener might be at with their sleep, and whether they're like, it's fine, or they think of themselves a particular way, insomniac, or any labels, no matter where you're at with your sleep, we can absolutely take things to the next level. And that's what we can talk about today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the inspiring story. And sleep is so fundamental that it's so interesting to hear you say how involved you are with all these different industries, because it's such a fundamental human thing that you can basically apply to hotels, poker, corporates, individuals, fitness, literally anything. So, give us a little bit of a teaser of what you mean by sleep as a skill. Like, what do you normally go in there and teach people?
Yeah, great question. And sometimes there'll be pushback. We've been on like over, 200 and something different podcasts in the past couple of years. And some people will be like, a skill? How is that a skill? We all can all do it. We're bored with it. How can that be? And what we stand in is that there's a particular opportunity for us to optimize this area versus just kind of getting by, and having this be a afterthought or something that's nice to have but not prioritized or what have you. Instead, if we're coming at it from this perspective of skill, then we can begin with kind of sleep 101. And I make the argument that if you really are standing in some of the latest of our research in chronobiology, then we see that how most of us as a society are behaving across the globe. Now, it used to be more siloed, and there were particular areas where there might not be as much of this, but better or for worse, much of the globe is now really impacted by these types of ways that we're living that are outside of these rhythms of nature, which are really dominant in some of this conversation. So what I mean by that is that what we really stand in at Sleep is a Skill is this concept of circadian rhythm entrainment. And that is this process of entraining our circadian rhythm, because our circadian rhythm, this 24-hour rhythm that as diurnal creatures, we're meant to really be active by day and at rest at night, exists on a spectrum. And like any great spectrum, there's, the weak side and the strong side. And we make the argument that many of us in our modern society are hanging out closer to the weak side than we may have been in years past, right? So instead, we're taking a series of behavioral change interventions and certain environmental shifts and various things that we bring in strategically to help support the movement towards that strong side of our circadian rhythm. And what does a strong circadian rhythm kind of look like? Well, it often means that instead of a lot of the efforting that can come about with sleep, because I'll have so many people that will reach out, they're really struggling, and I've been there, and they're really struggling. They want to know, well, what's the magic supplement, app, thing to do, etc., that will just help me turn off my brain at night and keep it off all 7 to 9 hours. And unfortunately, that approach might not be a winning strategy. However, with this other approach of strengthening our circadian rhythm, what tends to happen is an automaticity of these rhythms, so that you're bringing back that rhythmicity such that you are waking up at around the same time, no matter what you did last night. We all might have that friend or person we know that you'd go out and everyone's out till like 2, 3 a.m. and they're still waking up at their normal 6:30 or whatever. And we might have thought, oh, that sucks for you. We might have thought that was a problem. But it turns out that that's actually what we're gaming for, is that ability to have that sort of anchoring system that is present despite some of these kind of changes in our circumstances, and ability to quickly, with velocity, get ourselves back on track to that rhythm, because our clocks in our body, we often speak to the fact that our suprachiasmatic nucleus is that master clock that is then communicating with all these peripheral clocks in virtually every cell and organ in our body. And so if there is the missing of that clear scheduling system, which looks like, the timing of our foods, which looks like the timing of our bright light exposure, our darkness exposure, our temperature shifts and fluctuations, as well as even things like thought timing, movement timing, drug timing, all of these things play a role in telling the body what time it is and what to be doing when. And the beauty of this is that when we start to move to the strong side of that circadian rhythm, then there's no longer as much of this need and efforting to find that perfect meditation app to drift us off at night or what have you, because the body has such a pull for that sleep pressure at the right and consistent times for you. And then it's also helping to supply sufficient melatonin to shift us to a sleep onset time that really works, as well as keeping us asleep throughout the course of the night, and then waking up at around the same time, around a kind of consistent and well-orchestrated cortisol pulse in the morning. So that becomes the rhythm by which we're striking a chord. And then we have strategies to keep things in alignment, even with travel and time zone shifts and all the complications that might come about from modern living. We really have approaches for that.
This is super interesting. I think I remember hearing Andrew Huberman talking about the importance of usual and consistent scheduling of sleep. It's way more important than the length of sleep. So even if you are sleeping good 8-9 hours, but if you shift that schedule, it will affect your hormonal changes in a way that is negatively impacting your health. So this is interesting hearing from you as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you said that too, because One of my commitments on, these kind of conversations is to be able to leave the listener with practical takeaways. Well, this is one of our first practical takeaway that if you get nothing else out of what we're talking about, I hope that it's this, is that consistency is king, and we want around 7 days a week. So, we really want to devise every day. Really, that's the takeaway, right? 7 days a week, every day for the rest of your life. We want you waking up at around the same time. Of course, you can have shifts with the seasons and different things, but you're designing by your own choice that wake up time. And what's happening is, to your point around sleep time duration, that even if we are indulging on a particular night and we go out a little bit later, what we want to adopt is something that, Dr. Matthew Walker kind of refers to as the almost do nothing approach. And the do nothing approach can sound very counterintuitive and almost maybe cruel. And yet we want to do this for a couple of reasons. The do nothing approach is you were out last night till 2 a.m. and logic might say, well, my goodness, I normally wake up at 6:30 or whatever. So I'm going to sleep in for 2 extra hours or what have you to make up for that deficit. So instead, what we want to do with the do nothing approach is to do nothing and still maintain that about the same wake up. Now, you can shift a little bit. So the general wisdom at the moment is around plus or minus 30 minutes. If it's egregiously late, maybe you could move to, say, like 45 minutes or what have you. But you're doing this for a reason. So this is helping you stay anchored at that consistent, around the same time wake up that you were doing before, such that you're able to then bring yourself back to go to sleep at around the same time that subsequent night. Of course, also with that do nothing effect, you're not then kind of making up for that loss in energy by having lots of caffeine. You're not having long naps. You're not saying, oh, I'm going to go to bed so early, which often we find can backfire. And then people are kind of laying there with insomnia, or then maybe they fall asleep early, but now they're waking up in the middle of the night and just kind of like, hanging out, languishing there. So instead, with this do nothing effect, it helps you to actually give your body the gift of staying on this same rhythm, so that you're going to actually get very rich sleep that subsequent night. Because usually what tends to occur is within that night or the following night is this rebound sleep, and our bodies will then kind of greedily go after getting as much of that rich type of sleep that they were deprived of the night before. So that tends to actually make you feel better in the long run than this long shift, but now you're giving yourself an almost self-created jet lag known as social jet lag, and you didn't get on a plane, but now you're having the effects of jet lag. And not only does that kind of impact your cognition, but then we also find it also throws off things like metabolic jet lag, or gives you metabolic jet lag. So now you're pushing out your meal times, which is another circadian cue, and these cues are known as something called zeitgebers, or time givers. So these time givers tell the body what time it is and what to be doing when. The most important one, another practical takeaway that I hope people note, is the most important zeitgeber of them all in chronobiology is light. So anytime that you are dealing with some of these variations with your schedule, like I'm going to be traveling quite a lot coming up, so I will certainly be enacting some of these principles to help guide the body to the time zone that I want it to be on at the appropriate times. You'll be using strategic dosing of bright light exposure at particular times and darkness exposure at other particular times. A resource for this that I really suggest everyone get, and I have no affiliation with this company, but it's Time Shifter, and a great app where it's basically enacting the same algorithms that NASA uses to keep their astronauts on time when the sun is rising and setting every 90 minutes or so when they're shuttling through space, which is very confusing for the body. They do a lot to make sure that circadian rhythm stays aligned with particular types of dynamic lighting, they call it, on the shuttle. So they'll use that same algorithm for your trip to Paris or what have you, right? And so with that, you would put your flight in of what is coming up for you, and then in advance, days in advance, you can begin to adjust your rhythms. And then the day of, with that flight, there will be a whole itinerary of timing that when you get bright light exposure, darkness exposure, if you use caffeine or melatonin, you can dose that at those particular times, as well as temperature, food timing, all these other things that you.
So it tells you when to stay awake and when to go to bed?
It does, and it tells you when to stay awake, when to go to bed, even if you're, on this flight and what have you, and everyone else has the lights on and they're eating and the stewardess and the whatever. You are doing the opposite. You're wearing a mask. You are maybe using your melatonin at particular times, or you're being the one that most people are not so pleased with when it's totally dark and you've got the light on and you've got, this would actually be one of those rare times where we're telling you to put as much bright blue light and green light as possible, which suppresses melatonin. So you're glowing when everyone else is potentially in the dark, right?
Now, I have a question on the first advice you give on people who lose sleep, and you ask them to stay awake and do nothing and all of that, right? But what can they do if they are so tired, right? If they are just shifting by half an hour, by 45 minutes, but then throughout the day, they don't feel productive, they are tired, they're fatigued, they can't get a good workout in, or they lose appetite. Like, what should they do?
Yeah, really good question. Thank you for that, because it can sound nice in theory, but then the day comes and you've only got a couple hours under your belt. It's a real challenge, right? Yeah, I appreciate that. So a couple things. One, we know that of those zeitgebers we were mentioning, those time givers, you can stack those on the first half of your day to really underscore to the body, all right, we're waking up, we're keeping this schedule. So what are some of those things? Well, you get your bright light exposure outside, not from behind a window. There's studies show that it takes anywhere from 50 to 100 times longer to reset your master clock from behind a window versus physically outside, getting the light into your eyes. Making sure you are not using sunglasses or hats during that period. And then depending on where you might be on the globe, you might need to be outside longer, particularly on a day like that, than you might on any other given day, because that's going to also help from a kind of a phototherapy effect to give that drug-like effect that we get from bright light exposure, kind of excitatory. So you're bringing that in. What are some other things that tell the body that it's time to kind of wake up, turn up our body temperature? Food would be one of those. So that could be another strategy. So some of the work out of Dr. Sachin Panda, if you want to go in deeper, the Circadian Code is a book that has a lot of resources in that, with the suggestion of really kind of more front-loading our calories on the front half of the day, giving yourself maybe about an hour upon awakening to kind of turn on the digestive clocks, but then making sure you really mind your last bite of food. So you're looking at first bite of food and last bite of food, and then keeping that much more on the earlier side and closer to when sun is setting, and then you're not eating too much during darkness. So you're stacking potentially food timing. So you might be eating in the first half. If you are someone that utilizes caffeine, that might be something that you would bring in on the first half without going too far over. It's like that Goldilocks. Then cold exposure could be a strategy if you're not dealing with too much cortisol, or if you're not overly stressed. The cold exposure could be a strategy to further not only
that will wake you up.
That will wake you up. That will totally wake you up. And the subsequent paradoxical warming effect that comes thereafter, because then the body is it's almost like overshooting. Let's warm ourselves up, and as part of our goal is to get your body temperature up throughout the course of the day, because that can be another problem, is that thermoregulation can get thrown off when we didn't get sufficient sleep. And you're also choosing glucose stabilizing choices, because you're likely, with that insufficient sleep, having kind of a resting higher glucose state. So you might be craving some of the things that maybe aren't the best for you. So you're doing that. Movement is another thing, kind of maybe some people have heard of like The Rock with his strategy when he travels, wherever he lands, and he works out for like 1 million hours or something. So we can bring in some of that for ourselves. And even if that's just like a light walk or just some generalized movement, however it works for you, that can be another strategy. Beyond that, a couple other things that you can bring in is, one, some of the things that you can do is also heating up of your temperature in your space, your ambient temperature. So we have you having your space quite cool, much cooler than most people maybe have set it to, so while you're sleeping. So between 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit is the suggestion from the Sleep Foundation. So you're aiming to have that routinely while you're sleeping. But then when you wake up, you're doing the opposite. So now you're raising up the temperature and helping to bring that about, because that's one of the second most powerful kind of zeitgebers next to light is temperature. And I think we underestimate just how important that one can be. And then you can use power napping. So we suggest that you don't go too, certainly you want to go past what's the kind of ultradian rhythm timeline of around 90 minutes. You're aiming to certainly not go past that. And traditionally, most recommendations are in that power nap domain, which is kind of more in like the 20 to 25 minutes. Some people do talk about kind of the Tim Ferriss calf nap, or different people have different coined, or the, what is it, Nappuccino. There are lots of people got different trademarks, right? So having a little bit of caffeine before that. Now we're in kind of this biohacker conversation, so you might also look at certain types of nootropics that some people might bring in. Ketones could be a whole other way to deal with that possible inflammation that you might be dealing with on a subsequent night of insufficient sleep. And who knows if you're, alcohol or what might have been at play the night before. So some of these are potential strategies that you can bring in. And then from that place, then you're looking to make sure that when the sun is setting, you're doing the opposite. Everything I just said, you're doing the opposite of. So you're looking to start enacting fasting. You're looking to have dim to dark lighting during that time. You're looking to kind of shift over. If some people might have certain types of sleep supplement stacks and calming stacks, and you move into that piece. So it's kind of day mode versus night mode.
These are all great advice, by the way, Mollie. Thank you so much. And basically, make use of the cues of zeitgebers that give your body the signal it needs to stay awake. So we're looking at light, we're looking at temperature, we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at supplementation, and really optimize that. Thank you. And also activity. So I know you mentioned this term a couple of times now, and for the sake of our listeners, could you explain what chronobiology is? And is that the same thing as circadian rhythm?
Yeah, great call. Yeah, really, when we think about chronobiology, it's kind of really a newer science in a lot of ways. And we can think of it as the science of time and how time affects our biology. So within chronobiology, we're looking at some of those things that instruct the body on what time it is and what to be doing when, and then the subsequent kind of cascade of effects that can come about by virtue of that. Now, there's multiple biorhythms that we might be operating within. So I mentioned ultradian rhythm kind of being less than a day's time. Then there's circadian rhythm, that's about 24 hours. And then there's infradian rhythm, and that's more than 24 hours. So for particularly women of menstruating age, that can be a really important one to be mindful of, because that's kind of next level biohacking, if you will, because now not only are you making sure that you're entraining your circadian rhythm, but you're also looking to entrain your infradian rhythm. So that's a whole other, advanced course in sleep optimization and health optimization, because from that perspective, about every 28 days or so, depending on the person, plus or minus a few days, then they'll have these rhythms of very different hormonal shifts that are occurring. And we know that many studies that you can track some of these changes. That's another reason why we love using wearable tech, because that can be so helpful to track things like often a tendency for a downward trend in HRV, an upward trend in heart rate going into the second half of our cycle for most women of menstruating age throughout the course of that period when they are menstruating. That can be really important, because that can be something for us to take into account when we're making choices for both our exercise type, our food type, whether to have alcohol, THC, certain things that we might indulge in. There can be, from a strategy perspective, a certain place to put things and a certain time where they wouldn't really fit as well if we're looking to facilitate a parasympathetic response. So, for example, we have a lot of clients that will start to see a very clear pattern for them when they go into luteal phase and their body temperature's up, their HRV is coming down, their heart rate's coming up, their respiratory rates coming up, all kind of signaling more of a sympathetic tone. So during that time, then they might make different choices, and that can help support that they're having more ease in falling asleep and staying asleep during that period of their cycle. So these are just some examples of how these rhythms can really help support some of our choices and the design of our lives.
So would you say these are chronobiology is essentially biological processes that is based on the perception of time and a certain rhythm that your body is reacting to?
Yes, absolutely. And it really allows for us to, one, have reverence for the environment around us and just how much that really primes the body and says what to be doing and when, and also puts us back in the driver's seat of the relationship to our results with our sleep, instead of being mystified of the why that, oh, well, this night I was up a bunch of times, but the other night I slept through the whole night. Why? We can start to peel back the layers, and it becomes something where very often you largely will know a lot of the whys for the most part. There might be a few one-off nights or what have you, but for the most part, you'll have such awareness with the operating of yourself that it becomes uncommon in modern hours to have that level of insight and know-how to not only then, when you have gotten off track, to get yourself back on track, but then also to know some of the things and to make informed choices when you do decide to have, the extra drink or stay up a little bit later, what have you. Know what that can bring about the next day, and you're choosing powerfully to take that action. And then you're also aware of what it takes to get things back on track without having to just survive. For some people, it can be weeks to get back on track if they don't have this knowledge.
I get to interview all these doctors, scientists, and cool people in this health and fitness industry, all made possible because of this podcast that is funded by the company I work for, which is Health via Modern Nutrition, or H.V.M.N. And it is not that they pay me to do this, but I genuinely love and believe in the product Ketone-IQ. I use it every day before my podcast, before my workout, or even after my workout for recovery. There hasn't been a single supplement that can give me such a drastic change in subjective feel within minutes as much as Ketone-IQ has. For those of you who do not know me, I'm from Malaysia, I got my PhD from the UK, and my passion is in science and chronic diseases. And I believe it is all about transparency, scientific integrity, and about sharing with everyone so that everyone can benefit from it. And if you like this content and our work, please do support us by liking, leaving a review, or sharing with your friends and families, or even buying a shot of Ketone-IQ at any Sprouts nationwide in the US, and the first shot is on us. Just scan the QR code and you'll get your money back for your first shot. You can also use the code H.V.M.N Pod20, that is H.V.M.N Pod20, and get 20% off your first purchase at the H.V.M.N website. It's so interesting and fascinating that all these different behavioral aspects of life affect sleep. But similarly, sleep also affects all these different behavioral aspects if you mess with it as well, right? It's all so interdependent. So for your work as, a sleep optimizer, as a sleep coach, doesn't this mean that you have such a high touch engagement with your clients? Like, does that scale at all? Because you have to look at all these different aspects.
Oh, so well said. Oh my gosh. Well, I so appreciate your respect for this area of our lives known as sleep, because you nailed it. There's this bi-directional relationship with so many aspects of our lives that impact sleep, and then therein by sleep impacts those aspects. And that's one of the big things. So a couple of the things that we think are the happy other side of diving into sleep optimization is this kind of Trojan horse effect, in that you might go into this conversation of saying, oh, well, I want to have better sleep, or I want to improve my sleep. But in order to do that, what's actually required is to transform many areas of your life that maybe before were like a nice to have, or I should do, getting myself to the gym, getting myself outside, getting in nature, all those things like, oh, that's nice, but come on, let's get to the bottom line. And yet instead, when we start gamifying this and we have some objective data, so we often have people they're always wearing Oura rings, but We're often having them wearing continuous glucose monitors and things like daytime HRV trackers, or some of the kind of key stacks that we might have people operating within. And soon they'll see that in order to really move the needle on a lot of those, then they're making many other changes in other areas of life. So we call the sleep piece, this barometer of the workability of your life, is the results with your sleep. So that's a really cool opportunity. We think that it could be a bad news insight at first. It's like, oh, well, man, I got to change my whole life. But on the other side of it, it's, oh, I get to really transform my life. And then by effects, then I get to have improved sleep. So high touch point, 100%. Yeah. And that's really one of the things that we've currently designed with Sleep as a Skill is we have these cohort, really semi-private models. And so what those look like are small group programs that we take people through in 10-week long cadences. We hook them up to our Teams dashboard with the Oura Ring. And so we have the Teams overlay, and we see as a group, are we improving on different metrics in total sleep duration, in HRV, in wake up, sleep efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. We take a look at all of that and those trends, and then dynamically with the group, and they're also getting to see, they're often pleasantly surprised by just how much we can learn from each other by virtue of seeing, oh, well, Latt's, struggling with XYZ, and look what he brought in. Suddenly he's doing this. I'm going to try that too. So we do see that they're learning from each other as well, but we also give them coursework that they're doing in between our calls. But we do take advantage of what's known as the observer effect. And so, kind of this a classic effect out of psychology, that the minute we deem that we're being observed, then it seems that many people will shift their behaviors accordingly. And so we tend to see that because every single call, they are very much seen by, now we're going to share screen and look at their individual sleep stats, their HRV, what time they got up, what time they didn't, the whole world of it. So suddenly they're making new changes that they might not have made if it was just them off by themselves.
Everyone wants to get a good report card, right?
Right? Totally. And the good students really can step right up to the plate on that one. But also that's what's so interesting too, because sleep is one really weird paradoxical thing that sometimes can irk the good students, right? Like, because we do see there in certain studies, this certain trends for people with insomnia and kind of perfectionist-like traits. And I'm doing all the right things, and why am I not sleeping? So that can be really... Right, because you're so stressed, right? This like nervous system management. I mean, that was certainly me. I was, call myself out. And so that's really that cool opportunity from like an existential, conversation, that it allows for us to start examining how are we strong arming this area, and kind of like a Chinese finger trap, oddly, the minute we stop with the struggle and then just sort of let it be. And not to say, because we're having people do all kinds of things by day, but then once the night arrives, we're kind of just, okay, we're accepting how the night goes and practicing that level of acceptance. And it's a really interesting opportunity to practice self-growth.
This makes perfect sense, where you are leveraging technology and tracking technologies to really have that high touch point, to really track people where they go in, and then because obviously you can't just be next to them all times, at all times and all day, every day. So tracking and leveraging all these technologies that we have is a great point of making sure that everyone is behaving the way they should. And speaking of technology, what are the current sleeping gadgets out there that you would recommend people, our listeners, to actually look into or actually buy?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, so I mentioned for the sleep tracker that we're using at the moment, we are using Oura. That's not to say that I've seen a lot of people have a lot of benefits with things like Whoop, seen BioStrap. Some people do like Apple and others, right? So there's lots that's available and lots coming. So very exciting times that I fully anticipate that there's going to be some new players in the game very soon. So as of right now, 2023, we recommend Oura at the moment. Then One of the next ones is we do actually often recommend continuous glucose monitors because there is, to talk about bidirectional relationships, such a clear bidirectional relationship with glucose. And we have so many people that come our way that are struggling with wake-ups. And often, if you are struggling with wake-ups, beyond also ensuring that you're checking for sleep apnea, if you have some of the signs and signals that might be at play, because I think there's an epidemic of so many people running around having no idea that they have sleep apnea. So we do certainly recommend, if you have even the slightest inkling that you might have sleep apnea, or if you haven't considered it, like real quick, Google it, reach out to me, reach out to Latt, what have you. We can ensure that you're going through a very quick kind of rundown of possibilities. But then you can get at-home sleep tests that are done, things like Lofta, Empower Sleep, Rest Assured. There's lots of different companies that will get you for around like oftentimes $200 or so US dollars. You can get an at-home sleep test and see, are you qualifying for sleep apnea, which would absolutely, I mean, if you are dealing with that very clear impacts on your breathing throughout the course of the night, we can do all these other things, but we have to deal with that first. But so certainly that, and that's a nice piece of tech that you can really get a handle on, and you can also be testing ongoingly as you might bring in other interventions to address the sleep apnea to make sure that some of your interventions are working. So that would be another piece of tech. But with continuous glucose monitors, we often have people using those so that we've done small group focus groups with levels where we looked at small groups of people, overlaid them with Oura Ring data, and we would see drops in glucose throughout the course of the night, particularly that timeline that can be frustrating, the 3 a.m., 4 a.m., what have you, dropping in glucose and subsequent wake-ups thereafter, and often the types of wake-ups now where you're kind of up. So we're looking to minimize that effect so that you're having a lot less of that, and we do that by day. We're also looking at things like HRV daytime trackers. So we might use things like the Leaf or Hanu. It's basically Hawaiian for breath. And you're like, I'm wearing the Hanu right now, and so that is tracking my HRV. You'll see things like with daytime HRV, it takes some learning. There is a learning curve because there's a lot more noise with HRV throughout the course of the day than there is at night. So just me talking is going to lower my HRV. Me sitting up or standing or walking or working out or eating or, all these things can lower HRV. But then you can start to see, oh my gosh, I can modulate my stress response. So that's a really important place, especially when we're talking about sleep difficulties. One of the spoiler alerts with dealing with sleep is that often there's some form of kind of overly hyper-aroused brain activity during times when we might not want it to be that way when we're looking to sleep. So we're looking to become kind of Jedis at nervous system management. When I talked about my difficulties with my sleep, the ability for me to manage my nervous system was like not there. I was just like on the heels of, oh my God, I'm freaking out, panic attack, the whole thing. And I can laugh about it now, but at the time it felt so helpless. So, just like I have to survive this. And it turns out that we can train this area, which I think is really, really important for us to start to shift the narrative around. So that's a really exciting place so that you can practice these types of breath work and other things to train to put, our nervous system into a state of parasympathetic response. We mentioned H.V.M.N. He does a great job of talking about this, coining that term, non-sleep deep rest protocols, to train to put the brakes on the sympathetic response, enact a parasympathetic response by day, kind of a troubleshooting, and then by night, when you're really thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong in your life or what have you, you can actually, oh, right, I have a say.
What is that actually? What is the deep rest, like non-sleep protocol? Like,
good question. I know you and I have such an appreciation for Andrew Huberman, and many people have an appreciation for what he's getting out into the world. One of the things that he has coined is this non-sleep deep rest protocol. And the thinking with this is that you're able to enact certain things, certain practices like hypnosis, like yoga nidra, meditation, breath work, things that can shift the nervous system such that you're going into kind of this like trance-like state almost, where on the other side of it, you feel a shift in state, and you have maybe a measurable shift in state. So with those pieces of tech that I mentioned, say if you got the Oura Ring, you can do a kind of a moment or, do an unguided session where you'll see the changes in your HRV during that non-sleep deep rest protocol of your choice. So say if it's just like I'll do Brain Tap, if you've tried a Brain Tap or NewCalm or Calm app or Headspace or any of these different types of things that can get you into kind of an altered state and slow the breathing and shift you out of that kind of sympathetic response state into that parasympathetic response state during.
That sounds like meditation to me.
Yes, and so it certainly and has it's almost this like trance-like state that you might be going into, and it's just whatever your choice can be to get you out of that automaticity, the reactive nature that we might be in if not interrupted. And so many of the people that I'm working with that are struggling with their sleep have an experience that they're at the effect of whatever thoughts come into their mind, whatever state their body is in. Now they just got to survive that. Instead, we are peeling back those layers and saying, oh, actually, wait, we can have a say, we can re-regulate and now modulate our stress response. We can slow the heart rate. So, Huberman will talk about physiological size and different things that you can do to shift your heart rate and subsequently your HRV out of Hanu breathing. We like to do things like resonance breathing and other things that you can measurably, you can see the trajectory of your heart rate. It was way up here, and then by the course of doing even like a 5-minute session or something, you can bring that nicely down and begin to adjust your nervous system at will. And that's our game, is to just build that muscle. And it might be a weak muscle in the beginning. That's okay. For most of us, it probably is. But over time, as you keep bringing that skill to this area of your life, then you can really quickly, even in a high stress situation, know that you have that capability available to you.
Yeah, isn't it so great that we can now not only measure these different markers like HRV, sleep quality and all that, but we can also change our behavior and then correlate to these results to really reaffirm and also strengthen our motivation to strive for better sleep and better health and fitness. And if since we are talking about biohacking and all of this, we can't not talk about blood biomarkers, right? What are the blood biomarkers that people should be looking at if they are looking to optimize sleep? Like, okay, let's start with what biomarkers are we looking at if they're not having good sleep? And then, how do they improve them?
Oh, yeah. And this can be a whole conversation, a whole other podcast in and of itself, because that can begin about a whole quest and journey into the puzzle of what might be at play on a deeper level. So some of the just basic elements that we might want to be on the lookout for. One, it can't be underestimated, even things like your vitamin D levels, some of your B levels, some of your inflammation markers, hormone markers. Now that might, we can go into things like the Dutch test outside of just blood, but looking at urine samples. And so certainly just the most common thing that might be done around sleep is looking at something like your cortisol, how that is performing throughout the course of the day, as well as your melatonin, and how that is looking throughout when you first wake up until when you go to sleep. So we're looking at those. We might also be looking at different types of sex hormones and how those are functioning throughout different points for if it's women at different points of their cycle. And as you're starting to peel back the layers, then there might be other things that we might start bringing in. Then this is where it can really go down the rabbit hole. We could keep going, right? There's mold, there's parasites, there's gut health concerns. There's many, many things that can play a role in our sleep results. But I would say even just bare minimum, also understanding those beginning ones that many of us know, many of us are deficient in. So like the vitamin D, like the magnesium, some of these things that we might all just have kind of as a society just decided, oh yeah, we're all struggling with that. But then maybe not connecting how much that can be playing a role in our poor sleep results. So this is where the skill set of sleep comes in, because we might be kind of fighting this uphill battle if we have all of these deficiencies or things that are not quite working as well as we'd like them to, and then we're trying to do that strong arming of our sleep, particularly too if we're in an environment that that isn't allowing for some of those things to be optimized. So, I mentioned at the beginning of this that light is the most important Zeitgeber when we talk about circadian rhythm entrainment, infradian rhythm, and, this whole conversation of chronobiology. Well, what happens if you're living in a northern latitude location and it's January and you've been having months of insufficient opportunities to get vitamin D, and now we're struggling with some of the fallout of that because vitamin D is this precursor to serotonin, which is a precursor to melatonin. So how do we rectify that? Well, one, to your point, it can make a lot of sense to work with a functional medicine doctor, and that's often what we'll do too, is we have a lot of partnerships with different functional medicine doctors to go in deeper from the level of biology to see are there certain things that are egregiously out of whack that we need to be adjusting in combination with some of these other circadian rhythm enacted practices. But even if what we'd say is the steps that we're taking to entrain our circadian rhythm will still be beneficial no matter what comes back on those hormone panels that you might be getting or some of those things. We're going to still take those actions in alignment with that because those are going to help support and serve our greater goal here to normalize and balance some of these things. But often if you're dealing with a parasite from your trip to Mexico or whatever might be at play or Lyme disease or other things, then we want to absolutely be handling those in the process.
Amazing. And I know you are, Mollie is very, very busy and then she's got another call right after this. So I want to be respectful of your time. We got to have you back for, part 2.
Oh, I would love that. And I just had a blast with our conversation. We just aired our podcast with you, which was fantastic. So enlightening. I'm such a fan of the work that you're doing and just the difference that you're making in the world. I think we've discussed, I'm very, very passionate about the mental health piece as it relates to biohacking and certainly sleep, of course, but also with the work that you're doing, just I think is so, so important. And I know we have shared passions in many areas, so I'm excited to see what else evolves. But thank you just so much for having me on this platform to have this conversation.
No, thank you so much for your kind words and thank you so much for your support as well. And for our listeners who would love to find you on social media and all that, how can they look for you?
Sure, yeah. So at sleepasaskill.com, it acts as a bucket for all the things, essentially. So once you get there, the first step that we suggest is that you can take our sleep assessment. So you'll answer a couple of questions and we'll give you tailored response back specifically to you around what you're dealing with your sleep. You can also sign up for our weekly sleep newsletter, which we call Sleep Obsessions. We've been sending that out every Monday for over 4 years, haven't missed a Monday, and we aim for it to be the most obsessive sleep newsletter on the planet. We want to just give you lots of kind of practical takeaways, but also kind of sleep biohacks and experiments. And please, we also love the interaction. So if you have certain wearable data that you're seeing, certain cool trends on, or whatever, you started doing cold showers and your deep sleep's improving, or whatever it is, send it our way. We're happy to share that so that other people can be exploring and just getting excitement around these different things that we can do to make a difference with this area. We also have a sleep podcast where we have sleep experts and other experts like yourself coming on to really help open our eyes to all these different things that we can do to help improve and optimize our sleep and health. And then if you're really struggling with your sleep or just really fascinated, I hope, with this area and you want to dive in more, then we have these cohorts that we have all kinds of opportunities to go way, way deeper on what's going on for you with your sleep. And then one-on-ones if you really want even more intimate kind of hand-holding along the way and voice notes and high touch points, then that's available too.
Amazing. One thing I noticed, Mollie, is that you are so good at branding sleep because sleep is such a mundane thing, right? We do it every day. Everyone does it. But all these names like sleep ambassador, sleep advisor, sleep obsession newsletter, sleep as a skill, you just know how to brand things so that it becomes interesting. So that's one thing I noticed I wanted to point out.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. that makes me so happy because I gotta say, I often say this in just the course of my life. I still cannot believe that at one of my lowest points of life. So, and I say this for anyone listening that's like, wherever you might be with your sleep or your health, that there's, kind of the silver lining available. Because if I went into a time machine back all those years back when I was at the lowest point and I told you that this would be my life, I would have no way believed that this was possible. And I stand in that and share that because I think that that's one of the really exciting things that becomes available to all of us as we start to embark on this world of really taking ownership and excitement and curiosity around how we can impact our biology. And on the other side of that, there becomes hopefully this excitement and fascination with these things that we do routinely that we might have overlooked or taken for granted.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for coming on to Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. And we will love to have you for episode 2 around sleep and biomarkers and things that we didn't get to talk about in this short 1 hour. And I'll see you soon in KetoCon.
Amazing. Yes, I'll be looking forward to that. That's going to be fantastic. So we'll stay closely in touch. And thanks again.
Thank you.